Hi, I'm Vic Hartman with the Hartman firm. Today I'd like to talk to you about fraud. I hope you've never had to deal with fraud or its consequences. However, if you have, I hope I can provide some insights. Why do people commit fraud? Why do we care why people commit fraud? Well, the answer to those questions are very important to companies, governmental organizations, and individuals. They can deal with some very critical issues of how do we detect fraud? How do we deter fraud? How do we investigate fraud? If you've not heard me speak, let me briefly go from my background. I was an FBI agent for 25 years. I specialized in white-collar crime. I served on the FBI's corporate fraud response team. But most importantly, as it relates to this topic, I dealt with a lot of fraudsters. I interrogated them, I interviewed them, and I got to know them on a personal basis. For the past many years, I've been researching fraud-related issues. I'm an adjunct professor at Georgia State University, where I provide fraud-related principles to forensic accounting students. My practice in the private sector includes internal investigations, forensic accounting, and fraud-related consulting. As an attorney and CPA practice in this area, I pull from the best practices in law enforcement, academia, and the private sector to deal with fraud-related issues. For example, how does a company deal with fraud? What are the best practices and procedures? How do they message that tone at the top? Or maybe it's a smaller organization whose bookkeeper just defrauded the organization. How do you deal with that issue? Or maybe it's a government organization who's charged with deterring, detecting, and investigating fraud and corruption-related issues. Or maybe it's an individual who's going through a divorce and one spouse is stealing from the marital estate, or there's an individual whose partner just embezzled from them. So that's my practice, and I'm passionate about what I do. But let's get to the question at hand. Why do people commit fraud, and why do we care why people commit fraud? I think you can break fraudsters into two broad categories. One is what I like to call the predatory fraudster. So as the name implies, they're a predator, right? They're out to do harm. These are bad people. It could be the cyber scammer who's sending you a phishing email. It could be a flim-flam artist that you meet in the street. It could be somebody peddling bogus investments. But their goal is to rob you blind, right? We know these risks of the predatory fraudster, and hopefully we're taking steps to mitigate those risks. But that's not the nature of this discussion. What I'd like to talk to you about is what I like to call the accidental fraudster. All right, that's a strange name, but stay with me. I use this term accidental. I'm not trying to mitigate or minimize the harm that these fraudsters do. And in fact, the fraud committed by an accidental fraudster can be greater, more devastating than that committed by the predatory fraudster. Take an example of a corporate executive who engages in a large-scale financial fraud. The resulting damages can be significant to the company and the investing public at large. But I use the term accidental fraudster to talk about the mindset of the fraudster. They didn't set out to engage in fraud, but that's what occurred. So what does this individual look like? Well, if you could talk to them at a time before they committed fraud, they would have never imagined they would have victimized, embezzled, or did harm to their company, or they betrayed the governmental organization, or they did harm to an individual around them. So how do we get from productive citizen to fraudster who may be off to a prison sentence? Well, I asked myself that question during my 25 years with the FBI. In fact, as a newly minted FBI agent, right out of the FBI Academy, I thought I knew something about fraudsters. And I'm guessing you had some of the same thoughts that I had then. But what I've learned in the impending years, through arresting these individuals with fellow agents, through managing complex white-collar cases, and really getting to know fraudsters, that my ideals changed as to why they committed fraud. I think you'll find my findings truly amazing. If this topic interests you, please join me on the next video where I talk about the fraud tree and the fraud triangle.